There's a UK election going on, and I was really hoping that Cav can fill us in, because it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Tories are going to lose and Labour is going to win, but that's not really going to change much because Labour sucks ass. Am I correct in that assessment?
The different situation than the rest of the world. Like every other election coming up.
You're seeing, it's like every single. I mean, I wouldn't call it every single election because in
Canada's is remarkably similar.
In South America, it seems like you either elect the grandson of a Nazi war criminal or you elect a communist. Where in like Western democracies, it's like, oh, elect one guy who's like a hedge fund manager and terrible, or elect another guy who's like a lawyer and terrible. But how much or how close they are in being terrible is just like doesn't even matter at the end of the day. And Ireland, I know we're not talking about that. Ireland is even worse for this. It's literally like the two major parties are literally the same. I couldn't even tell you any of the differences. But with the UK, yeah, you're right. We could just end the podcast there. Like that's all people need to know. But no, if we want to elaborate a bit further, basically, Jeremy Corbyn has been kicked out completely from the Labour Party. He can't even run as a Labour MP. Because the Labour right essentially did a coup after the failure of 2019, but they actually tried to make him lose both elections in the first place because they never wanted a socialist prime minister. Most of them they're like Blairites, more right wing than Tony Blair, I'd say. And yeah, they had a coup. And then Keir Starmer, we call him Keith on the UK left because Keir Hardie is the founder of the Labour Party. That's why he's called Keir Starmer, but we don't want to associate them together. So Keith Starmer, he basically came in the leadership campaign promising, basically, I am Jeremy Corbyn, but without all the baggage. Like, I'm not an anti-Semite, like, old Corbyn, who is anti-Semite for opposing Israel, but I'll still promise all the good things. I'll abolish the House of Lords, which is our unelected second chamber, nationalise water, nationalise rail, all this great stuff. But then slowly as time has gone, he's gone back on every single promise and has played heavily into the culture of the Tories, started talking about trans people in a similar way, started basically saying about the refugee crisis, the Tories are bad because they don't deport them quick enough. And if you elect me, I'll do that. So it's like the Overton window in this country has shifted so far right. And it's depressing that I'm old enough that I remember this sort of rhetoric was seen as like, so like, it's just not British, saying all this terrible stuff about immigrants and refugees. We're not like Nigel Farage, that fringe candidate. And now he's coming in with a new party, Reform UK, which used to be the Brexit party. And it's looking like they could maybe even overtake the Tories, at least in terms of votes. I'm not sure about seats. So it's a far-right party being more far-right than the current far-right version of the Tories. So that might be interesting. But yeah, as you say, we're going to have a Labour landslide, maybe even bigger than 1997. And which is more depressing because the 1997 Labour Party weren't exactly socialist. We're going to have even less change than that. It's literally like electing the management class to run the country without controversy. Think of it like Joe Biden win the presidency. It's basically the same thing on like 90% of issues. Maybe they won't make the country like totally shit like it is going down right now. But there's no incentive for left-wing people to vote Labour. And because they're going to win, I would say unless your Labour MP is an actual socialist, just don't vote for the Labour Party and at least don't let them win as much as they think. And hopefully vote for different parties because, we do have a multi-party democracy, even though it does basically boil down to Labour versus the Tories, just kind of like the US
majoritarian,
election. Yeah. But like Lance was saying, like most Western countries, it literally is an election between two shit options. One's just like kind of worse, and that's it. Like it's really depressing and just shows you. And actually, the one thing I'll end that on is why it's so depressing is more than ever we need more like radical policies. And Jeremy Corbyn promised that in 2017 and 2019, and was basically ridiculed for it. And obviously called an anti-Semite for his opposition of Israel. And then he just seems so vindicated now. But now the way the UK politics is working, like we're just voting for nothing. Like nothing's going to get better, and that makes me want to consider my future in the UK like overall. So I need to get my Irish passport sorted so I can like fuck off to Spain or something, live in the socialist utopia of Spain, rather than like spend the rest of my years like just miserable in the UK about how our politics. And I can go into it later if you want. There's something about the UK politics. We're just ruled by the people who've ruled us for 1,000 years. And I don't think that's just ever going to change. Like, we're so stuck in our ways.
I'm curious, Cav, because my perception of the UK has always been that, like, when it comes to social issues, it's not that controversial. Like, gay rights and abortion has never reached the levels as they have in the United States of controversy. But when it comes to trans issues, it's a totally different story. Why do you think that is? And is it like basically J.K. Rowling's influence? Is that an oversimplification? Like, is it just like she's driving a lot of the cultural stuff right now?
So I've seen Owen Jones talk about this. I think the perception of Turf Island is actually a bit wrong, because if you break it down by in terms of British acceptance of trans people, it's actually quite high. I think it's the majority actually accept, I think, at least self-ID. It's the other things like with sports and bathrooms, and it like fluctuates a bit. And if you look at the history of the UK and trans people, you might have seen this going viral on Twitter. There's certain like newspaper articles, even TV shows, like soap operas. We've had trans characters because back in the day, before it became like a moral panic, it was more accepted as just like, you know, maybe like a one-off in that community. Like we don't really care, and that's the British way. Most people don't care about other people's business, right? We're not like people who would really police everyone. I think it's very British to not get involved with stuff like. And I think with the trans stuff specifically, like you touched on a good point, like why not gay people? Why is it just trans people? Because the UK is a very secular country. If you start banging on about Christianity in politics, most people think you're a weirdo. Like I was raised Catholic and in a Catholic school, and that's like a religious minority in England specifically. And it's like, even if I came out and started saying shit, like people think I'm weird. But with trans people, I think it's just like I wouldn't say J.K. Rowling, because I think most people don't care about J.K. Rowling. And I know that seemed like a bit of a shock because of Twitter. In this discussion, you don't hear much talk about J.K. Rowling. It's mainly like a Tory culture war. And just like the US, it's just stealing from the 1980s and 90s culture war about, you know, gay rights and stuff. Bathrooms, children, changing rooms, you know, trans people must just, you know, be sexual predators, go through all of that, you know, to go into someone's changing room to sexually assault. You know, it just makes no sense. But I think what British people do love, just like Americans, is just fear-mongering about threats to children. So if you frame it in a way like, you know, medical malpractice on children, because that's the recent thing in the UK about, you know, puberty blockers and stuff, that's the recent law changes. I think that's where people just reactively go, oh, that's bad because I don't understand it. Because we, unlike America, there's not too many visible trans people in like mainstream culture in British society. And I actually spoke about this with a trans British YouTuber called Matriarchetype, because she also said, you know, when I was growing up, I didn't even really know it was a thing, like being transgender, because we just had no people in the public eye. So I think for British people, even more than Americans, we just don't we don't understand it. Not talking about myself, of course, but then when we have this moral panic, people just instinctively go to, oh, you know, it must be a bad thing. So I think the perception of Turf Island in terms of all of us being rabidly hateful of trans people, I think that's a bit wrong. But I do think British people can be easily swayed on very specific issues. So puberty blockers and bathrooms or something like that. Because the sport thing, like, I don't even hear that come up here, because I guess we just don't prioritize high school sports as much. So you're not going to hear that in the conversation from Rishi Sunak. But it is pathetic, because him saying that, you know, he doesn't even believe it when he says the Tories know what a woman is. It feels so like alien to the culture. It feels so American. And
can I ask about the conscription? Like, how was was that just like a last minute? Like, he doesn't care. He's fine with like firebombing his career, or because like that can't be popular in any way, shape, or form.
It's so desperate. You'll never find like a least nationalistic like group than English people. Like everyone, the only patriotism in this country is everyone agreeing it's shit. Like that's the only thing we'll all agree on and be proud of. Or like maybe like football potentially, but yeah, the conscription thing is a joke. Because on one hand, the army don't want a bunch of random British people signing up, because why would you want loads of people who really don't want to be in it, be in your military? Like we don't have that national service. If you're in the army, no one's thanking you. People probably call you like a cunt or something because you're an idiot for joining. Like, they're not going to be thanking you for your service in the UK. They'll probably harass you for being in it. So it was just like with the trans stuff, it's a desperate attempt, like last gasp, desperate attempt to be like, we're the party of patriotism and whatever bollocks, like with you know, knowing what a woman is. And it's not serious as well. Like, I don't know if you've been following the Rwanda like deportation plan. It's the same thing. It was never going to happen. They were basically threatening all refugees who come in the UK. If you come here illegally, we're going to deport you to Rwanda. And they signed a big deal with the Rwandan government, like really corrupt government, which is in bed with the UK government. And there has never been a flight going to Rwanda because it's just a publicity stunt for the election. Same with, you know, national service, and it just causes a big debate. And it's just to appeal, like, you know, who would that appeal to in America or Canada? Yeah, like baby boomers probably, who think, you know, the young people are so ungrateful and don't know what a real job is or real service is. So yeah, it's just because they know they're going to lose, as Mike said, they know they're going to lose. So I think it's just like damage and imitation, and maybe getting Tory heartlands to like shore up your seats, and, you know, older white people maybe. But yeah, it's a joke. I couldn't imagine that ever being implemented, because I think like less than 1% of people eligible to be in national service would even sign up. It'd just be totally embarrassing. Like, we'd make the country look so stupid. So I can't see anyone ever implementing that again, because we don't have any love for the country. And why would you have love for a country that just fucks you over all the time? Like, again, that's what most British people agree on, especially my age. We just hate the government, so we're not going to go die in a foreign war for this government that, you know, makes our lives worse, basically.
What's driving the unpopularity of the Tories? Like, why is it so clear that they're going to lose even before they announced, you know, a lot of these unpopular things? Like, why do people hate them so much?
So it's crazy because obviously Boris Johnson got such a massive election victory. So you obviously have that element of they've been in power so long, and people just get sick sometimes of people in power. But I think it's like, when you're in power so long, you can't blame anyone else. Like, how can you say it's the Labour Party in the financial crash of 2008 for ruining the country when it's 2024? They do try that sometimes, though, but it just doesn't work. And also, by every metric, and people can really feel it in their life as well, everything's getting worse. Like public services, grocery prices, which are traditionally quite cheap in the UK, and I think are still pretty cheap compared to somewhere like Canada. They've been going up. And I think rent is a big one. So especially like with the new electorate of like younger people, the rent, there's like literally like no rent control in this country. It's just insane how we're owned by landlords, and so many landlords are MPs. And also the Tories, remember, crashed the UK economy in 2022, nearly like erased nearly all the pension funds, like the public pension fund that everyone gets, because they were gambling it like with these ultra libertarian economics. And that sent like the pound crashing. Because I remember I was in Vietnam, and how much your money suddenly was worth less in a country like that when it happened. So it's just like so many things together. And I think people just want change at the end of the day. And I think what people, you know, don't get right of Brexit, a lot of people voted for Brexit because they wanted a change in their life. They just couldn't it's like with Donald Trump in 2016. They just couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. And when you're being told, oh, it's the EU, it's immigrants, it's a foreign dictatorship, people will be like, oh, I'll vote for Brexit and my life will get better. And then we have the Brexit election 2019. Boris Johnson says, elect me to finish the job. We elect him. And then still our lives getting worse and worse and worse. So all the Tory promises have basically been shown to be like bullshit while everything gets worse. And I think big ones that people really feel, NHS waiting times are just ridiculous. Like, people can't get ambulances anymore because there's just not enough stuff. And obviously, even as you get an aging population, that stuff becomes more important. So people are really feeling this right now. And, you know, when you're desperate, you're just voting for a change. Do people know what Keir Starmer stands for? No. Would most people be able to name like 2 policies he has? Probably not. And that's what his game plan has been. Like Joe Biden, I'm just not them. It doesn't matter what I stand for. I'm just not them. So everyone's going to vote for them because they're just not the Tories. And that's the strategy. I don't know what you guys would think. Let me know. Do you think in 2020 that was the right strategy for Joe Biden to just be like, I am not Trump, but I won't promise anything big or any reform? I know it's obviously in hindsight you can see like
I don't think it was simply that. Like, I think that was obviously a key part of it, but I don't think that was the only part of it, right? Like, there was a lot of promises that he made that he didn't follow through, like student loan forgiveness, for example. But like, there was a lot of day one things that he reversed just because they were put in through executive order, and so you can reverse them.
Yeah, for me, I think that with Joe Biden, the biggest thing was COVID, because that was the thing that really impacted all of our lives in a very, very substantial way. So seeing the way that Trump botched it, I honestly think that made the biggest difference. Although I don't know if this has ever been quantified, but I feel like if COVID never happened, Trump would have probably gotten, you know, a second term, just because he wasn't necessarily offering any revolutionary policy. Sure, he was trying to code himself as a progressive, but then behind closed doors telling donors that nothing is going to fundamentally change. So I think that a lot of it was just, look, now is the time when you want a president who's just normal. And even if it's a milquetoast one, he can get us through COVID, at least competently. I think that's really what it was about. And there's really something to this thing that we see happening everywhere, right? Where we kind of oscillate back and forth between, center left and far right, the Tories, then Labor, Democrats, then Republicans. And I think this is just like everybody not really knowing how to react to the changing world and the death of capitalism. And so we're scrambling. And, what you said about people just voting for Brexit, so true, right? Like we did the same thing here. Well, I didn't, but, Americans voted for Donald Trump because it's like, well, I know that the establishment isn't working for me. So I'm going to go with the anti-establishment candidate, even though, Donald Trump, he's a wealthy person. When he got in, did the bidding of the establishment. Not necessarily surprising, but people just don't know how to respond to it. And it's frustrating because the way that you defeat fascism is by having a leftist impose popular policies. I mean, the way that, basically we always kind of view it as like FDR saved capitalism from itself, but it's kind of true in a sense because, after, the Great Depression and, during World War II, he came through with a lot of policies and he was really popular. And I think that we're kind of just too corrupt. Like Democrats are too far gone. They're too neoliberal to try that. Same with the, the Labor Party. And as a result, we're kind of just all losing our shit and go back and forth between two shitty parties. One thing that does stand out to me, though, just as an American, with regard to British politics, is I'm starting to notice, and maybe it's just because I'm paying a little bit more attention now because there's an election, I'm starting to notice more, I guess, like an Americanization of British politics in the sense that you get so much more loons now. Like Suella Braverman. I mean, she's kind of a Marjorie Taylor Greene type fascist in the UK. And I know she's no longer part of the, the Tories, but what is the general response to those kinds of like politicians in the UK? Because I just feel like I never would have expected that from the UK. And maybe it's because I have this stereotype of like, British people just being proper and respectful. And so to see somebody like Suella Braverman, even though she's not saying it like Marjorie Greene, but she's saying incredibly xenophobic and racist shit. I just feel like it's shocking to me. And I'm sure that there was always a demand for that in the UK, of course, because it's not like xenophobia is new. But what has the general consensus been, just like in your social circles and whatnot, to that kind of politics?
Yeah. So the social circles I can't really expand on because all my friends I've known since we were kids. So we all like Catholic, Irish or Polish or maybe some other like ethnic minority, and then you get raised and then you all just become atheists who are like leftists for some reason. I don't know why Catholic school does that. But in terms of just general society, I think the Americanization and the xenophobia, I actually don't think they go hand in hand. The Braverman one is interesting. So if people don't know, we had two South Asian Home Secretaries. The first one was called Priti Patel, and she was pretty extreme. And then Suella Braverman succeeded her and was way more extreme. And basically, they seem to get a pass for being super racist against like a racialized stereotype of a Muslim because they are, in fact, like ethnic minorities as well. So some of the stuff they've said, if a white politician said it, they would be called racist, right? But for some reason, the Tories love to do this. We have a gay MP saying this. We have a trans MP saying this. We have ethnic minorities saying stuff bad about other minorities. You can't call them racist because they are minorities. So that's the weird thing they're doing, which I don't think is very American because you do get that in America, but it doesn't feel authentic when someone like, who was that football player who ran for Senate?
Herschel Walker.
Herschel Walker, yeah. Or even like Caitlyn Jenner.
Insurrections about the people.
Yeah, and it's just like in the UK, there is actually quite a lot of support in various ethnic communities for like the Tory government, and that's why you see a very diverse like front bench, and they'll throw it in the Labour's face because it's mainly white on the Labour side. They're like, look at us, the most diverse cabinet in Britain, run by an Indian guy. Like we're so progressive and so British, like British.
So identity politics.
It literally is weaponization. That's why I made a video about woke fascism recently in terms of like the weaponization of identity politics to do fascism is like a thing that is very British as well. And it's just like the Americanization, I think, is more for like the trans rights stuff. Because like you're saying, xenophobia, racism, that's as British as like, the establishment of the country have always been a bunch of racists. So like it's hard, but I get what you're saying. I think the insanity of British politics has gotten worse, and I think that's a knock-on effect from Donald Trump. And obviously Nigel Farage said he wasn't going to run so he could go campaign for Trump, and now he is running. So you have that link there, and I predict he's actually going to be the next prime minister after Keith gets in, because I think he'll actually run for the leadership of the Tory party.
That's horrifying.
I think he will be, if reform don't keep surging, I think he will one day be the Tory leader. And I think that's the Americanization in terms of like the real blatant nationalism, which usually is, you know, something you associate more with American politics. I think that nationalism is something that I would say is an offshoot from America, because Britain is not a patriotic country traditionally, but you do now have these parties, and even the Labour Party, when Keith makes a speech, he has like 4 Union Jacks behind him. And I'm just like, because you think everyone is a fucking idiot in this country, that they only vote based on how many flags they see. Because that's the one thing, the Labour Party, they also really look down on working class people now. So they think, oh, I'm just going to throw a flag up there and you'll vote for me because I'm a patriot. But that's the way it's going. And that's the sad thing about UK politics, is the Overton window has definitely shifted, where you can understand it now more in an American way, which I would never say before. You could never say the Tories and the Labour Party in the past were like Republicans and Democrats, where now I could say you could easily make that comparison, because that essentially is what they are. Maybe not as far right, of course, but you're basically working with the same framework there. And like you were saying about the death of capitalism, Mike, I feel that really hard. It's like 2 parties playing ping pong while the world just like burns around them. And like, because that's the thing you can't ignore, isn't it? It's climate change. Like, it's all well and good just playing this game of politics, but when you have this like existential threat to humanity in the background, you can't just keep electing centrists and then far right people, because they're not going to do anything. And that's why, you know, I am, you know, hearing that stuff about Trump with the oil barons. I'm like, for fuck's sake, like, we're just so screwed, aren't we? Like, it is really depressing being a leftist. So if you don't pay attention to politics and you're somehow watching this stream, maybe this should be your last exposure.
Man, do you remember? So I think that we first talked in 2019, and it was after Labor had lost. And I was gutted, because before that, I was like, oh my God, we are possibly going to live in a world where Jeremy Corbyn is the prime minister and Bernie Sanders is the president. And that was like the first wake-up call, the first red flag. And now look at us 4 years later, where it's like, we're all gonna fucking die. We're doomed.
I know, and it's so like, Bernie's been disappointing because, in my opinion, he's been a bit of a pushover, especially with his last presidential run. But I think even like you were saying, you watched my video about why Bernie Sanders is like still a Zionist and stuff, and I think like a lot of older politicians are very traditional. Like, he does see Trump as like this existential threat, and he will do anything to stop that if that means supporting Joe Biden. And I think it's like an old school mentality. But yeah, like you're saying, it's depressing, because when Bernie lost in 2016, you felt like there was still some hope. But then when he conceded in 2020, I'm like who else is there? And with Corbyn, it's like they've what they've done as well. They've purged all the leftists from the Labour Party. I don't know if you've seen this recently on Twitter. They've literally been kicking people out for like alleged anti-Semitism again. I can't even believe this is still working, by the way. Like, they're still calling people anti-Semites for criticizing Israel and kicking them out of the party, including like obviously a lot of anti-Zionist Jews as well, while allowing Tory MPs to switch to the Labour Party. So we live in a world now where there are multiple Tory MPs who've switched affiliation. So they're now sitting Labour MPs in Parliament, and they've kicked Jeremy Corbyn out of the party, and he can't run as a Labour MP. So these far-right Tories are now sitting as Labour MPs. Corbyn can't run as one. And that's like the state of UK politics right now. And I'm gaslit into thinking that Jeremy Corbyn is the racist one, not the racist Tories who switch parties suddenly because they jump ship knowing what's happening. So that's you're saying, wild.
Like, didn't Boris Johnson write a book where he like spreads an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory in that book about how Jewish people control the media, and that just like he got a pass? No one talked about that. Like, half the people I talked to don't even know that. And like, meanwhile, Jeremy Corbyn is a rabid anti-Semite. And I was the other guys doing the thing, the racism.
Well, that's the thing with Canada, England, and America. It's like, everyone who actually is an anti-Semite is actually not one because they support Israel. So we're talking about Suella Braverman. She's been banging on about cultural Marxism for years. And because we're so like illiterate in terms of like fascism in the UK, it's like we don't even realize she's literally just saying loads of anti-Semitic shit. And like you're saying, Boris Johnson wrote that book. No one has ever brought that up because he supports Israel. So they don't give a shit. Jeremy Corbyn says Jeremy Corbyn is pretty mild-mannered with his support of Palestine in terms of like the stuff you would hear from the 5 of us here about what we'd say. And he still gets called people act like he's Hitler. Like, it is actually insane. And it's insane how that really works as well, because the UK traditionally, I know we've been like one of the biggest supporters of Israel, but people don't give a shit about Israel. It's not like the US where like Christians are insane about it. And like, obviously, because, you know, the US has a massive Jewish population as well. You have that like support there already. And then you have more like Democrats supporting it. The UK doesn't give a shit about it. So it's so insane that this has worked so well in purging like all left-wing politicians by just calling them an anti-Semite just because they might have some mild criticism of Netanyahu. They actually Keith made a Labour MP apologize just before the genocide started because she called Netanyahu a fascist. She had to stand up in Parliament and say sorry.
Wow.
Because they said it was anti-Semitic.
I cannot apologize for that. I'd be like, fuck it, I'm out.
Yeah, I guess my career's over in
I'm
politics.
not apologizing.
Yeah. And she was, of course, she was a socialist, and that's why they essentially like they get off on humiliating socialists. But they're really like fucking. I'm a bit annoyed now looking back. I wish the socialists purged all the Blairites because they got called Stalinists anyway. So just do it.
Exactly.
But we're too nice, aren't we? Like all of us, we feel too bad. I don't want to ruin someone's career. I don't want to ruin someone's like family life or some shit.
We also I think we have more hope in people. Like we hope people can learn and be better. And no, they're just pieces of shit. And we should realize that a lot sooner.
And that's something, Mike, you're talking about like radicalizing. If you would say to me like in 2016 or 17, oh, like purge all the non-socialist members of the Labour Party, I'd be like, no, you can't do that. But then now it's like, yeah, I would definitely do that. Like if that ever happened again, I'd get rid of all of them. Like for no reason. I wouldn't even have to charge them with something fake, like, oh, they're anti-Semites. I'd be like, because you're terrible people, we're just changing the party now. But that's why the one thing I will say, the hopeful situation, like South America is really interesting to me. And I get happy because like at least the left have some success there. Where now in like, I guess it's
Mexico too.
Mexico.
That was a big
recently Mexico. But it's just everywhere like on the Atlantic. Like near the Atlantic. So we have Ireland on the Atlantic, which is fucked, and then England nearby, and then you guys in Canada and America. And it's like it's just something about that ocean. I don't know, just makes us all like terrible at politics or something. But it's also we just all share the same, like we're all from the same place basically. Like we're all Irish, English, and like we're German as well in England. So it's like just something about that. I don't want to be like into eugenics, but there's something that makes us shitty at politics.
I don't want to be into eugenics.
There's something in Northern European DNA that makes us love fascism or something.
We got to do some leftist phrenology on what's making us fucking insane.
He's joking, everyone. These are jokes
for
the inevitable clips.
Yeah, I'm joking for everyone apart from Germans, but I'm messing.